I'm Tom Stewart, the Executive Director of the National Center for the Middle Market at the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. With me today are two members of the faculty, Ray Noe and Larry Inks, who are the co-authors of a new study on performance management and the importance of performance management for middle market companies. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that middle market companies are defined as those companies with revenues between $10 million and $1 billion in sales. There are about 200,000 of them in the United States, and they account for about a third of private sector employment and a third of private sector GDP. Ray and Larry came to us asking if we would explore with them how performance management works in middle market companies. And when I think of performance management, I often think of the performance appraisal. And I often think of all those Dilbert cartoons you've seen about performance management and about performance appraisals and how badly they're often done. And so let me begin. Ray, Larry, what's the difference between that annual appraisal and performance management?
Well, I would say that the annual appraisal is really the dot at the period at the end of the sentence. You know, a lot of people do confuse the two, but performance management's the overall process that you engage in throughout the year. And if done well, if goals are set and you have periodic discussions about performance, then that end-of-year performance review discussion is more a formal discussion, and it's not a surprise. And so it merely becomes, as I said, the period at the end of the sentence.
So often it's a very perfunctory exercise. We come in, you spend an hour, you fill out, you go through a form and you listen for the but. Gee, Tom, you've been doing a great job, but. You hear the but and then you walk out. Why is it so perfunctory?
Well, Tom, I think it's perfunctory because most managers don't like to do it. They don't like to evaluate their employees. These are folks on their team. It's easy to send the positive message. It's more difficult to send a negative message. Also, they might not have the training to be able to have these performance discussions. And also many times it's run out of HR. It's not something that's integral to the business like it should be. So I think those are...
So talk to me a little bit about that, and in particular, talk to me about whether performance management makes a difference. Because when it is done in that perfunctory way, it's, well, once a year I got to have my spinach. But do we have evidence that well-done performance management results in better company performance?
Well, Tom, in the data that we collected from the middle market firms, we found that firms that rated themselves high on the performance management process, looking at it as a process, like Larry said, rather than an event, had higher revenues, performed better than their competitors, and firms that evaluated themselves as average or below in their performance management process. So while some have advocated that we do away with performance management, I think what Larry and I would advocate is really taking it beyond the event, making it a daily way of life in terms of getting feedback, revisiting goals, giving appropriate consequences for good and poor performance, both in terms of compensation and non-monetary rewards. I mean, we know people like feedback, and I think that's really the important part of performance management. Appraisal, like Larry said, is just a dot or an event. And if you just rely on that in terms of rewarding good and poor performers, differentiating performers, making compensation decisions, you're really not taking advantage of the value of performance management. And the companies that do so, at least in the middle market, from the data we saw, it makes a difference on their bottom line.
Mm-hmm. So as a longtime student and sometime critic of HR, I was impressed. I don't think I've ever seen before data that shows such a strong correlation between an HR activity, and we asked companies to rate themselves A or B, or grade themselves A, B, C, D, or F, and those companies that graded themselves A or B outperformed on revenue growth, job growth, profitability, and their competitive advantage versus their peers. And of course, correlation is not causation, but I've never seen data that strong. Have you?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, particularly with performance management, I have not seen that kind of data.